Is this thing on? Just a fair warning, my pronunciations are going to be all over the place today. Hibachi, bake, bat... I'm gonna call it the bat... Bachi? So, the Bachi, right? The thing that I think surprised me the most was the fact that this was actually supposed to be performed as a play, not just as like a myth that's told, like, and recounted as like a story. You know what, just as I was reading it, I felt like there was a lot of, I don't know, special effects that were kind of going on that would be really hard to capture on stage, especially in ancient Greece. Like when Dionysus pulls the branch down and then Pentheus gets on it and it goes back up. I feel like that'd be kind of hard to capture on an ancient Greek stage. Maybe that's just me. And also all like the blood and gore that's like communicated, maybe it would be like kind of like a Hamlet play where it's like interpreted and just it's written in the script but it's not actually supposed to happen, you know? I call it a Hamlet play, not a Shakespeare play. And also like the really long monologues that were in that, maybe that's just a classical thing with classical pieces like this, but I feel like that would translate not super well on stage, especially the chorus that has to say these like pages and pages of lines sometimes, like in unison. That just seems to be really hard. So there actually were two values that stuck out for me during the play, or perspectives, whatever you want to call them. And the first one I noticed was pride. Right off the bat, we see Dionysus being pretty proud of who he is. I mean, he's the son of Zeus, so he is of divine birth, and he is a god, so he deserves respect. So, I mean, you get a big head about that. I understand, that's kind of how it is. And he seems to really carry this self-worth all the way from when we first meet the character in the beginning through the very end. And he's pretty consistent and unwavering about that, you know. He continues to make comments along the lines of, I am God, worship me and live, or do not and die. I just think it's funny that our protagonist, you know, like the good guy in the story is acting like this. You know, when Pentheus is disguised and he takes him to see the Maenads, he's like, this is the man that has denied me and mocked you, like, come get him, you know, dinner served, I guess. And then he just gets torn to shreds like that. Like, I think that's really odd that pride is portrayed like that in a more positive way, at least that's how I interpreted it. And the second value is fidelity. Now, right from the beginning all the way through, we see that Zeus likes to sleep around a little bit and cheat on Hera just a little bit. You know, when Dionysus is born, Hera's like, I want to go kill this kid because he's not legitimate. You know, he was born from my husband's union with another mortal. And the same thing happened in the original myth of Hercules. Not in the movie, not in the Disney movie, but it did happen in the myth where Hera tries to kill Hercules throughout the story because she doesn't like that her husband is cheating on her. But I don't think anyone would appreciate that. Even the people on Earth, like the mortals, remind themselves about how great Hera's rage is, about how he had to be sewn in to Zeus's leg to survive. And Hera might be angry, but the mortals also worship these gods. So I'm a little confused as to if that means that the Greeks valued fidelity as like man and woman should be, you know, joined in marriage, intertwined, you know, like celibate until then? I don't know. So I wonder if that the Greeks were okay with that kind of behavior, or it was just like, they're gods, they can do whatever they want. So when I read the line that mentioned Pentheus and his girdle, which I thought was just what women wore after corsets kind of went out of fashion like 100 years ago, but that pretty much got me thinking, oh, what are they wearing in this play? Like, what would that look like? So essentially, everyone's clothing was a huge rectangle, but if Pentheus had dressed up as a woman, how would that be different from his male-presenting clothing? And I learned that it's just on how the fabric is folded and draped and the kind of accessories you wear. So men, at that time, were supposed to be really strong, so their clothing would kind of emphasize that. And of course, women have different anatomy from men, so this region would be emphasized by tying a girdle, or a piece of rope pretty much, at the waist and under the bust, kind of like it was in the Regency era, so I think Pride and Prejudice kind of time, which I guess that also was inspired by the more classical way of dress. But this for me just kind of helped me visualize, you know, what these people were wearing at the time, and instead of thinking, oh yeah, they just wore the same thing because the Greek Halloween costumes look all the same, right? Alright, so the Maenads, right? They're pretty much depicted in two different ways that I noticed. So there's the way that Dionysus sees them, which is pretty much as servants. They do whatever he wants, they're kind of under his spell. they follow his every word, and they just kind of do his dirty work for them. Though I will admit he is rather fond of them, but maybe that's just because they obey him. And then in Pentheus' mind, they're just kind of useless creatures because they're female. Now he doesn't really seem to talk about the Maenads super specifically, except for wanting to watch them do whatever they do. But he always talks about, you know, one by one women slip into the shadows to satisfy the desires of men, and that's kind of like, oh, that's all you think women do, huh? Then he goes on to say something about women coming to a festival and then drinking, and then everything kind of becomes rather sordid, as he says. And the other individuals in society seem to kind of ignore women altogether, so that must mean that they're pretty much at the bottom of the social ladder and are impressionable, sinful, wild, you name it. They probably are it. So as for Elvis Presley being on the cover of a copy of The Banshee, I'll keep this short because the video is probably already too long. Dionysus. Charming, godlike, very popular with the ladies. What else was different about Elvis? He danced, he attracted all sorts of women at the time, and he was also very charming. They were both highly criticized for their behavior. They're very similar in their own right. Of course in very different eras and time, but very similar people. On the topic of morals and values, what do you think of the gods' behavior through this? Do you think the Greeks actually valued infidelity and being wild and having a lot of pride? Or do you think that they actually didn't like that and were just okay with that because they were gods? And second, what did you think the moral of the play was? Because I got nothing. Alright, that's it.